Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the ASEAN-India Summit, the 19th summit. In fact, member states of ASEAN and India have decided to establish meaningful, substantive and mutually beneficial comprehensive strategic partnership. Both sides also reaffirmed the importance of maintaining ASEAN centrality in the evolving regional architecture in the Indo-Pacific. This was decided at the 19th ASEAN-India Summit held in Cambodia this week, where Indian delegation was led by Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar. Both sides also decided to enhance cooperation on cybersecurity, counterterrorism efforts and digital economy, along with expediting the review of ASEAN-India Trade in Goods Agreement. ASEAN-India dialogue relations started with the establishment of sectoral partnership in 1992, which then graduated to full dialogue partnership in December 1995, summit-level partnership in 2002, and this then became a strategic partnership in 2012. ASEAN is central to India's Act East policy and its vision for the wider Indo-Pacific. So today we'll try and understand as to what transpired at the 19th ASEAN-India Summit and what is the significance of this comprehensive strategic partnership between ASEAN and India and all other various related aspects as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Shubhmoy Bhattacharjee, who is here with us in the studio, consulting editor with the Business Standard. Welcome, Shubhmoy. We're also joined by former Ambassador Anil Wadhwa and Dr. Shriram Cholia, foreign affairs expert as well. They're joining us. We'll start the discussion, but before we do that, Shubhmoy, let me first bring in my colleague Tina Cha, who is in Cambodia, and let's try and understand what is happening there. Tina, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar led the Indian delegation. He made nice, good, wonderful points there in his speech. If you could take us through as to what exactly was he conveying in his address.
Today, in his speech while addressing the ASEAN-India Summit, the Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar added more weight and value when he emphasized that for India, ASEAN is a very critical player in the regional, global and multilateral order. In the context of the current geopolitical environment, the Vice President stressed that both India and ASEAN have to expand their relationship, and for this he suggested that a comprehensive strategic partnership is the way forward. For over 3 decades, we are celebrating 30 years. For over 3 decades, we've had a multifaceted, multidimensional relationship ranging from trade to technology, also connectivity to issues like climate change. But this has to be expanded further. And for this, what's been suggested and what the Vice President asserted upon is that we have to think of ways of how to deepen cooperation in the existing areas, at the same time also enhance people-to-people relationship through trade and other potential areas, Vishal.
Okay, so there it is. Thank you so much, Tina. Let's begin to try and understand the wider aspects now, and I'll begin with you, Ambassador Wadhwa. Let's start by understanding, though I've given some dates, but let's go a bit deeper into understanding this relationship between India and the ASEAN nations. How solid is the foundation, one, and two, how has been the journey in the past 30 years, because it all started in 1992?
Yes, that's true. It's been an incremental journey between India and ASEAN, and you rightly said there are certain timelines that we can keep in mind. Very briefly, in 1992, sectoral dialogue partner, 96 dialogue partner, the summit dialogue partner in 2002, 2012 there was strategic partnership, and now we have the comprehensive strategic partnership. So the relationship has been steadily growing in various fields. Progress has not been so fast as expected, because after we changed the Look East policy into Act East policy in 2014, we were really looking for a fillip as far as trade and investments are concerned. Unfortunately, because of the developments in Myanmar, the connectivity agenda has been derailed a little bit. So therefore, there's been a delay Otherwise, that would have actually provided a big fillip to bilateral trade and investments. And also, the agenda of connectivity has been derailed and delayed a little bit because of the COVID. So, therefore, where we are at the moment, it's not so bad because we have bilateral trade of about $98 billion. That was the last year's figure. And we also have an investment from ASEAN, which is about 117, $18 billion into India, and India has invested $55 billion into ASEAN. Most of it, though, is with Singapore, one single country, and therefore India would like to have a diversification of trade and investment. Also, our other plank of making sure that agreement in goods, which was signed way back in 2010, and of course that has worked in fits and starts. So we want a review. The economic situation in India and in ASEAN has changed.
Okay.
And we know that ASEAN has been used by countries like China for their own purposes, and therefore is not serving the purpose that it was meant to serve. So we would like to have a review of those provisions. And of course, the traditional cultural links that we have with the ASEAN, that gives a solid plank for the bilateral cultural relationship. But new agenda, new items on the agenda have been added.
Okay.
Most importantly, we saw at this summit, bilateral summit, we saw an emphasis on cybersecurity. Before that, we had seen an emphasis on maritime security. And now going forward, I think when Mr. Rajnath Singh meets with his counterparts on the 20th of November, we will see much more progress on the defense side as well.
Okay, indeed, and we'll look at all these aspects, business specifically, economics as well. But let me first bring in Dr. Cholia here as well. Dr. Cholia, all these contours of or various aspects of this relationship between ASEAN nations and India, ASEAN as a bloc, be it cyber security, maritime security, counter-terrorism efforts, digital economy as well, and trade and commerce, which Mr. Wadhwa was also referring to. There's one thing which both sides have reiterated time and again, that is ASEAN centrality. So if you could, throw some more light on what exactly do we mean by ASEAN centrality, and then how is that going to happen?
Vishal, ASEAN centrality is a reference to the regional architecture, placing ASEAN and ASEAN's interests and will in the middle, meaning that ASEAN is a grouping of 10 countries of what can be called middle and small powers, and they have strength in numbers, 10 of them coming together to form a common market and to integrate among themselves. So the idea is that there are bigger players in the region. China is the biggest power. Japan is relatively smaller. United States is a so-called resident power in the Indo-Pacific, and there are new emerging players like India also in this. But the idea is that ASEAN is really geographically and in terms of the regional architecture for integration, it is the key. And we have to strengthen the unity of ASEAN. That's what Prime Minister Modi and we've been repeatedly saying as part of our Act East policy. ASEAN is the building block. And ASEAN, if it is divided and is broken up, Ambassador Wadhwa was saying that, Chinese, for example, are trying to manipulate and to keep ASEAN weak. And in the process, what they do is they play off one subgroup against another subgroup within the 10 countries. So there's no common position of ASEAN on anything, especially on security issues. And that's how the Chinese are able to try and expand their hegemony. So I think we are saying that we should strengthen the regional integration mechanisms. We must not let them be overridden by great powers.
Okay.
I think that's the main message. And of course, ASEAN has its own vision for the Indo-Pacific. And ASEAN vision says sovereignty, territorial integrity, rules-based order, international rule of law, UNCLOS, the law of the sea, all these must be respected.
Okay.
So on all these issues, when we say ASEAN centrality, it means that their positive vision for equal treatment by the big powers must be respected. India stands for equality of all. In fact, Prime Minister Modi laid out our vision in the Shangri-La dialogue a few years ago in Singapore, saying that irrespective of size and power, we believe in equality of all countries, especially small and middle countries of ASEAN. So I think that's where I think we are coming in to try and be a balancing force. Otherwise, ASEAN can be easily exploited, divided, or even in the past during Cold War period, they were even occupied and dominated by other great powers. And what we want is ASEAN vision and centrality to come forward so that these countries, independent-minded countries, can form a bloc and bring everybody together. They want an inclusive architecture, not an exclusive one or one which is based on might is right. ASEAN does not want might is right. ASEAN wants a democratic regional order, and that's what we are supporting when we say ASEAN-centric vision for Indo-Pacific.
Okay. So equality for all, democratic regional order out there. We'll come to the Indo-Pacific part as well a bit later. But Shubhmoy, ultimately, it most of it boils down to economics. How the trade and commerce is working around, and when we are looking at this relationship, both sides have been doing good, as Ambassador Wadhwa was also referring to. But some tweaks are required, and that is something which has been acknowledged in the joint statement as well, saying that both sides will review the goods and trade agreement between ASEAN and India. So what are we looking at in terms of specifics when we are talking about the key elements of the economic aspect of relationship?
That's interesting. In fact, yes, Ambassador Wadhwa was talking about he gave out the numbers, and impressive as they are, and also he pointed out that it's not yet grown to the extent that we would expect it to. We also are cognizant that, look, where is India now talking about of exports? We have just, after decades of being flat at $300 billion, plus minus 10%, India has suddenly jumped up to 400. And the plans are, or rather the way the things are going, India is pushing for export target of something like $900 billion. Where does that number come from? A large part of that has to come from the ASEAN region. Essentially, trade talks with ASEAN, as you rightly pointed out, has to have a large trade component, allowing of goods and services, but largely goods, to flow between the two regions. And that is why the review of the ASEAN-India trade in goods was very significant, because that just sets the right stage for the two countries, for the two blocks, to start talking substantially, easing up rules, making it simpler for goods to flow. For instance, if you look at Indonesia, or even Myanmar, that basically, it's just not even what you might call stone's throw. You basically just almost next door. How much is the distance from the last island in the Andaman group to Indonesia? It's hardly anything. So with that sort of a regional connect, it's absurd that the flow of goods hasn't really taken up.
That is why the push on infrastructure in northeastern part of the country as well, to establish routes which can further, smoothen the entire process of trade. Is that what the idea is?
That's right. Connectivity in every respect, customs procedures, documentation procedures, currency procedures, in terms of even making a truck move from India to across Myanmar to Thailand and Laos. Despite all the efforts, it has been a Herculean challenge. On which side of the road will the truck travel? That actually often becomes a challenge. So, these are like huge operational challenges, but obviously all of these can be solved, and that is where the ASEAN-India connect becomes important, because ASEAN, as you pointed out, as Dr. Chowdhury also pointed out, doesn't have any what I would say a problem in terms of being a foreign power, a threat in terms of anything. They are essentially a trade bloc which is highly integrated. In fact, ASEAN is a trade bloc, has been much more successful than I would say even the EC has been. And that is something which is often not recognized, that a country is so diverse could actually bring along an economic contiguity which is at a scale which has been far more in many respects than what the European Union has been. So given that, it's very natural that India would say that if I want to expand my trade to $900 billion in goods in the next few years, then obviously it has to be looking at ASEAN. Yes.
Ambassador Wadhwa, let's talk about the more central aspect of the ASEAN-India relationship, and that is Indo-Pacific. ASEAN is central to India's wider Indo-Pacific vision. The Act East policy as well. For the ASEAN member states also, the Indo-Pacific is equally important. And from both sides, if you look at it that way, then the challenge is how to deal with China's hegemony, in increasing hegemony in the region. Is that right?
Looms large
Yes.
in the security calculus of both India as well as ASEAN. But of course, ASEAN has a different outlook on China because they are so enmeshed with the Chinese economy that they would not like to take sides between the United States and China in the rivalry between those two countries. As far as India is concerned, starting if you go back to Shangri-La in 2017, Prime Minister Modi had also spelled out the principles on which India works in the Indo-Pacific. And there again, the principle of inclusivity was spelled out quite clearly. So there is a certain synergy between ASEAN's outlook for the Indo-Pacific, AOIP as it's called, and also India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, IPOI. Now, we have 7 pillars under India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative with a very heavy emphasis on the maritime element. And why is this heavy emphasis there? Is precisely because we would like to make sure that the South China Sea is free and open and is kept open. Sea lanes of communication are open. ASEAN also wants that, but ASEAN has an added element there, which is the dispute on the South China Sea. At least 5 countries are involved with that as far as the Chinese are concerned. And of course, there has been a judgment of the International Tribunal on the UNCLOS, which the Chinese do not agree with. They have their own historical claims. But ASEAN is continuing with a code of conduct negotiations with the Chinese because they want to come to a via media. And this is the ASEAN way of solving their disputes, and we must respect that.
Okay.
Having said that, there's one other element that I'd like to add here. That over the years, the maritime security aspect between India and ASEAN has been strengthened quite a bit, and that includes information sharing, that includes coastal radars, and also in space, 2 very important space stations that have been set up in Indonesia and Vietnam, and that was reiterated today in the bilateral statement between India and ASEAN.
Okay. Dr. Cholia, the overall issue of how to go about in Indo-Pacific and focus on all those aspects which have been time and again reiterated by both sides in terms of following the rules, the order, the international order, ensuring regional security as well, finding peaceful ways, and including in all that is the Chinese angle as well. And as Mr. Wadhwa was pointing out, ASEAN nations would have their own way of looking at it, and we have our own.
Yeah, but there is convergence, Vishal, because first of all, ASEAN is not averse to using the term Indo-Pacific. The Chinese are still calling it Asia-Pacific. They don't even accept that India should play any role in this region. So ASEAN is clear that they want India to play a bigger role and to cooperate with them through defense diplomacy, through joint exercises. We have done bilateral and also even trilateral naval exercises with ASEAN member countries. And there was at a time even a talk that Vietnam might be brought in or Indonesia into the Quad Plus formation. Now that is where ASEAN will be a little bit cautious and wary because of the economic interdependence or even dependence on China. And secondly, they often believe that if they provoke China too much, then the Chinese may actually turn up the heat on them even more in South China Sea disputes, in the maritime spaces which China has occupied and now built military bases, and even on Taiwan. So I think they want to tread little carefully on the Quad, and they have not formally shown interest in joining the Quad, which is Australia, Japan, India, and the US. But if you look at the interoperability, it is increasing, and at the level of militaries, and the defense ministers level meeting we are doing with all 10 ASEAN countries at one time. That's very significant development. It's part of this comprehensive strategic partnership, the new terminology we are using, and also joint maritime exercises with all 10 countries at one time.
Okay.
This has not been done before. We have done 2 or 3 at a time. So I think this is going to send a clear strategic signal. Our naval capabilities are slowly enhancing, and we operate more in the eastern side of the Indian Ocean up to the Straits of Malacca. And beyond the Straits of Malacca is what we call the Western Pacific. That's where the US and Australia and Japan are bigger players. But we would like ultimately to have a role even in the further towards the Pacific. That's how we realize the Indo-Pacific. So I think ASEAN countries, they welcome it. They want India, for example, Vietnam, they want India to take more and more oil exploration blocks in the contested waters so that it sends a message to the Chinese that their sovereignty claims are not at all recognized by any major player. So I think there are ways, subtle means by which they want India to become a bigger player in supply chain. In the China plus one strategy where companies are trying to diversify away from dependence on mainland China. A lot of Southeast Asian countries and Japan and all of them want India to host. You saw the Foxconn investment in Gujarat, $19 billion plus for semiconductors, for example. So a lot of countries in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia want India to come in a way that balances out China, but they will not want to provoke and anger China right now because they believe they don't yet have the alternatives to fall back on. And US security umbrella, US credibility is low in Asia. It started with the Trump administration. Even now, although there are many ASEAN countries have formal alliances, for example, Philippines is a formal ally of the US, but they can't depend on them. If China is pushing them hard, they're not sure if the US will really come to the rescue. So that's where India and a group of other countries, if you create a regional deterrence mechanism, ultimately I think that is what ASEAN wants in a soft way, a soft counterbalancing of China, not a hard balancing, and that is work in progress.
Soft balancing out there and regional security being the prime concern. But coming back to the economic aspect, and before we wrap this up, Shubhmoy, apart from that trade agreement which we were earlier talking about, review, a few more things which have been once again reiterated is enhanced cooperation in digital economy. Now, that's really important on both sides, and dealing with economic crimes, economic offences as well, because we've seen economic offenders moving from one country to the other, and some of these nations end up being safe havens.
Absolutely, and Singapore has got a base where ASEAN, India and other countries do operate together, basically as a sort of a naval force expander. It's often not recognized, but it's a very powerful combination that brings these countries together to ensure that the Indian Ocean region and beyond, especially the Indian Ocean region, stays peaceful, because our largest percentage of the world trade today goes through this Indian Ocean region. So to that extent, there is already a framework of cooperation that has developed, and that's a very interesting framework that has developed. It stays under the radar, but it's actually a very interesting thing, because not only for security on the seas, but it is also a center from where territorial climate crisis, which is a very significant thing affecting all the nations in this region, are often commonly harnessed by that center. So there is a good framework that's already available. Digital economy, as you said, is the next one, where these countries can jolly well come together in terms of harmonizing the standards, and that is something which is India would be very keen to do, especially this time in the G20, talking about, remember, what are the issues that can be brought up forth, so that the Indian footprint or the Indian way of working on the digital economy with the other base and the UPI stack becomes the model for this region. So yes.
So that is going to be really important and crucial to look forward to when we're talking about digital economy there. Thank you so much, Shubhmoy, Ambassador Anil Wadhwa and Dr. Shriram Cholia as well for sharing your views and insights as our experts were explaining the various aspects, contours of the ASEAN-India relationship, which is now moved up to the comprehensive strategic partnership with a clear focus on cybersecurity, regional security, rule-based order in Indo-Pacific, and of course the economic aspects of it, digital economy, dealing with economic crimes also. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments there and keep on bringing you detailed analysis. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.